so that we can come up with ideas which are better. उससे पहले मैं अपने बारे में तो बताना भूल ही गया. I'll start. Okay, hi everyone. I am Sadan Hussain. I am from Delhi. I did my graduation, post-graduation from Delhi itself. Then I thought that I should do a PhD. I got into it, but I didn't choose it because I thought that I should not. And now I'm working as a water ecosystem specialist here in Wetlands International South Asia, New Delhi, working under MOEFCC and Ministry of Jal Shakti. So yeah, and I love speaking, but today I feel like that we're all drained. So let's talk in context of India. So आप सब ध्यान रखना क्योंकि ये आपको मदद करेगा like to frame questions and to give an idea of what exactly is going on. So India is a big country. India has about 4% of world's fresh water. ठीक है? जो भी पूछना पूछ लेना बीच में. And the 4% of world's fresh water is used by 17% of the world's overall population. We have 4% of the fresh water, and how is the dependency? 17% of the global population depends upon it. 10 centimeter per year, water level rate is declining, so that is a point of concern. 70% of surface waters and groundwaters are contaminated, so that is also a point of concern. And what are we doing to it? We are doing nothing. 50% of leakage of water supply is in India, including the rural and urban areas. So अब हमें एक बेसिक सिनेरियो का आइडिया हो गया है कि हमारे पास 4% फ्रेश वाटर है जिसमें 17% हम यूज कर रहे हैं, 70% के अराउंड हमारे पास कंटामिनेशन भी हो चुका है लगभग, और 50% हमारा वाटर लीकेज है. अब हम कर क्या रहे हैं? एवरी ईयर वी सेंडिंग डेलीगेट्स टू द यूएन एंड स्टफ, बट व्हाट एक्जैक्टली आर वी डूइंग? सो वी नो दैट वी हैड दिस नेशनल मिशन ऑन क्लाइमेट चेंज, दैट पॉलिसी, जिसके अंदर हमारा ब्रेकआउट है एग्रीकल्चर का, वाटर का, सब चीज़ों का. So NWP, that is National Water Mission. So what is National Water Mission? Like, do you guys have an idea? Does anybody knows what is National Water Mission? Yeah, that is also. What is it? Do you know? Yeah. Okay. ओके, सो लेट्स जस्ट स्टार्ट बिगनिंग से कि कैसे ये सब होता है. ठीक है, तो सबसे पहले एक है एनडीसी, दैट इज नेशनली डिटरमाइंड कंट्रीब्यूशन. तो ये एनडीसी जो है इसमें हम बात करता है डिफरेंट मुद्दों का कि भाई क्या हमारा कंट्रीब्यूशन होना चाहिए. वी टॉक अबाउट एग्रीकल्चर, वी टॉक अबाउट वाटर एंड वी टॉक अबाउट डिफरेंट स्टफ. सो एनडीसी वाज प्रिपेयर्ड इन द यूएन कॉन्फ्रेंस ऑफ पार्टीज इन 2015, दैट वाज अडॉप्टेड इन द पेरिस एग्रीमेंट. तो एनडीसी में जो था उन्होंने डिस्कवर करा कि भाई उनका एजेंडा जो मेन उनको लगा वो ये था कि हमें लोअर एमिशन करना है 33 से 35% बाय 2030. फिर उन्होंने कहा कि हमें इंक्रीज करना है टोटल क्यूमुलेटिव इलेक्ट्रिकल जनरेशन फ्रॉम फॉसिल फ्यूल्स, राइट? फॉसिल फ्यूल्स को हमें रिप्लेस करना है और हमें इलेक्ट्रिकल एनर्जी जनरेशन इंक्रीज करना है बाय 40% बाय 2030. उन्होंने कहा द क्रिएटिंग कार्बन सिंक्स ऑफ 2.1 2.5 टू 3 बिलियन टन्स टू फॉरेस्ट कवर. हमें अपना कार्बन सिंक्स बढ़ाना है. एंड एनडीसी सेड water is the most critical approach and we are going to adapt it. So how we are going to adapt it? What does NDC say? It says that we'll have to enhance efficient use of water, ensure access and take adverse impact of climate change due to water. So there come into picture now national water policy and national water mission जो इंडिया गवर्नमेंट ने सोचा कि अब हम ये करेंगे. So what do you think? What it is based upon? Like क्या क्या होना चाहिए आपके हिसाब से? क्या क्या मतलब let's जानते हैं क्या किल्लत है, मतलब why are we talking about water policy and what is the what points should be included in policies? Like आपको क्या लगता है? हाँ. Okay, so let's discuss about the problems right now. Yeah, anything else? Like why do we need a policy for water in India? Okay, so you're trying to say that there is discrepancy like in the distribution of water, unequal distribution of water. So इधर से मतलब क्या है मतलब?
Reducing the contamination of water, like improper system, not using sustainable use of water resources. Yeah.
Like anyone else? Yeah. Okay, so we will talk about recommendations later. Let us talk about let's just have a brief idea what's climate change is doing to water. So that day we had a climate fresh activity organized downstairs. So वहाँ से हमारा एक idea तो हो गया है कि what is climate change doing to the water sector. So what exactly is climate change doing? First and foremost, due to climate change, the temperature is rising, because of which there is glacial melting. The ocean's levels are rising up. So it gives rise to cyclones, floods, the hydrological cycles are getting altered, and because the hydrological cycles are getting altered, the overall procedure of the functioning of water in the living system is getting altered. And what is it happening? Like, there are floods, there are droughts, and there are diseases related to water. And when we are talking about water, water has an integrated approach with agriculture. So if you are affecting water, then agriculture definitely has to do it. So this resource development report of 2015 says that 85% of the Indian water is being used by the agricultural sector. So we can see that there is a clear cut, demarcation saying that if water is affected, then agriculture is getting affected. And how is agriculture getting affected by the change in water? See, Sir told us about the different cropping patterns, that the different cropping seasons, that is Kharif, Rabi, and stuff. So if they'll be, we can clearly see that now the monsoon cycles is distorted. Because of the monsoon cycles, the water cycle is distorted, and we don't receive, that amount of rainfall that is expected to grow crops. Moreover, when we are seeing rise in heat temperatures, you have seen this time in North India what has happened. So because of this, there are drought-like situations. The soil is losing its fertility, and moreover, when we are talking about chemical fertilizers and stuff, it's creating more barren land. So this is what happens. And so now, like Lakshay, will you like to add on something upon this?
Because of agriculture, how it has been impacting the overall populations living in urban centers. Agriculture is a leading cause, uh, according to reports, in future due to climate change, because it will have malnutrition impacts on kids. Even today, we are seeing thousands of, not thousands, but like almost 50% of women are anemic, and children suffer from, like, every third child suffers from stunting because of malnutrition, and that is because of the food security. So it will continuously affect as our different climatic cycles will be impacted. So this is something which needs to be looked at, and how we can really see climate change, impact of climate change in various ways.
So, like, when now we'll try to shift a paradigm to from loss in agriculture and water to this financing and migration stuff, because everything is interlinked. When we're talking about climate change, we need to understand that if somebody is saying that I'm a water specialist, they don't need to say that they're a water specialist, because it is all an interlinked approach these days. For example, if you're talking about disasters due to water and agriculture, like famines, like floods and droughts, so their disaster management plans comes into picture. So when we're talking about disaster management plans, then we need to realize the fact that it now the times have gone that there'll be suggestions of only disaster professionals into it. No, now people from different backgrounds need to suggest it. So like somebody is a financer, he need to tell us something. Somebody is a stakeholder working in the agriculture sector, they need to come and give their input. So it is all an integrated approach which says that if one natural resource is getting affected, then definitely it's gonna have an impact on other things as well. And when we're talking about human health, see, human health is it seems like we are at the center of everything that is going around the globe is affecting us. And That is what when we say that water is affecting our livelihoods. Also, usually when we're talking about climate change in water, we're talking about the reduction in water bodies, the increase in in the increase in water table or whatever it is. But what we miss is water and sanitary hygiene. That is also a very important parameter which we usually miss when we're talking about climate change. But we need to realize that due to climate change and the shift in water paradigm, like water reductions and stuff, there are people who are getting privileged while there is a division in the society where the people are getting deprived. So water and sanitary hygiene also has to do a lot with this climate change stuff, because like I'll give you an example of the Kosi Basin in Bihar. So what happened is this Kosi is a transboundary river. We all know that. So and it has a history, a massive history of floods that is affecting people, the riparian communities living around that area. So what happens is that due to this flooding is due to the climate change and the shift in the rivers, the shift in the rivers area. So what's coast? So what's happening is they वो यहाँ घर बनाते हैं, अगले साल पानी यहाँ तक आ जाता है. अब वो फिर बेचारे सब कुछ क्लाइमेट माइग्रेशन कम्स इनटू पिक्चर. शी विल बी टेलिंग मोर अबाउट इट. वो वहाँ डिस्प्लेस होकर वहाँ गए, फिर से अपना रिवर चेंज कर रही है कोर्स, क्योंकि इतना अफेक्ट हो रहा है बिकॉज ऑफ द एंथ्रोपोजेनिक एक्टिविटीज दैट इट्स गेटिंग अफेक्टेड. So now let's talk about climate migration because of water and agricultural loss. Also, just one more addition that at times what happens is, for example, you're working on a restoration plan. For example, if somebody is saying that I'm restoring this particular river, so I'll give you a very good, a funny example. I recently went to a conference when somebody was an ADM city of the city. It's a city in Orissa. मतलब वहाँ के ADM city कह रहे, we got a restoration plan of a lake. तो हमने कहा भाई आपने क्या करा है restoration plan में? तो ही सेट कि हमने क्या करा, हमने वो हमने ना दीवार खड़ा कर दिया और हमने जो है ना वो लगवा दिया सीट्स और झूला लगवा दिया आसपास और हो गया रिस्टोरेशन. ये रिस्टोरेशन है मतलब. सो वी नीड टू चेंज अप द डेफिनेशंस एंड दैट कम्स फ्रॉम क्लाइमेट एजुकेशन. क्लाइमेट एजुकेशन इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. तब तक जैसे टेक एग्जांपल ऑफ बेंगलुरु फ्लड्स, अर्बन फ्लड्स हुआ बेंगलोर में, तब लोगों को पता ही नहीं था कि कब्जाया हुआ है पानी और उसके ऊपर बना हुआ है जगह, तो नॉलेज नहीं था. So अब जब affect हो रहा है, then they are realizing. So what is the root causes? Climate education. Climate education comes into picture. Climate action comes into picture. So hand over to you. Let's talk about climate migration a bit. Like you're talking about climate migration.
Am I audible? Yeah. Thank you, Saddam. That was insane. Hi guys, I'm Anaga. I work with law and policy. I graduated from law school just last year, following which I did the LAM fellowship. And now I'm working mostly with climate-related policies and health-related policies. So I'm going to be speaking about climate migration. So before I come into climate migration, let's look at migration. So when we talk about migration, we mean the movement of people from their original place of residence to another place, either
Can you keep your mic? Yeah.
Yeah, either temporarily or permanently. Now, some of them leave their original places because they want to go in search of better opportunities or better employment prospects, etc. But when it comes to climate migration, they are moving because they have been affected by climate change. Okay. So when they move from a climate prone or climate affected area, they're leaving behind all their all their belongings, their homes, their agricultural produces, etc. So they're displaced or they're forced to be moved from their original place. So the New York Declaration for Refugees and Migrants states that migration should be a choice and not a necessity. And in case of climate migration, we know that it's not a choice that they have, it's a necessity that that's been forced upon them. Now, climate migration can be caused due to two different kinds of events. So one is extreme weather events. So this is your cyclones, your floods, and that kind of stuff. So remember when cyclone Amphan hit, over 1 lakh, 2 lakh people were displaced all across the country. Now, this was due to two reasons mainly. One, the state preempted that, okay, a cyclone is going to hit and a lot of people are going to be displaced across the country. So the state itself made a lot of people migrate to another part of the country. The other reason is because after the cyclone hit, people were affected, their homes were damaged, and hence they had to migrate themselves. Now, the other kind of migration is also due to gradual onset events. So this would include slowly rising sea levels, when salt water intrudes into agricultural produce and people are no longer able to look after their agricultural produce in the same manner possible. So it's not a sudden thing that happens. So due to the prolonged effects of climate change, they have to migrate in search of better prospects. So think about now. I'm sure a lot of people over here are from Mumbai, and we know that a lot of people migrate to Mumbai in search of better opportunities, better employment, etc. But if you had looked at the IPCC report last year, it projects that cities, including Mumbai, Chennai, etc., would be underwater by 2050. So what we see at that point in time is a reverse migration. So right now people are migrating to places like Mumbai in search of opportunities, but 30 or 40 years from now, people will be migrating from Mumbai to inlands because of the effects of climate change. So that's something that we need to keep in mind. Now, displacement or migration can also be internal or external. So what we usually see is that when an extreme weather event hits, so people living in the coastlines, they move internally. So in a country like India, where we have a very diverse geographical terrain, this is very much possible. But say, look at a country like Bangladesh. So if you look at their map, they have a very long coastline. And they also have around 57 transboundary rivers crossing into Bangladesh. So when, say, an event with a lot of water hits, it's not possible for all the people to relocate within the premises of Bangladesh. So what happens? They will start migrating to other countries, one of them being India. One of them being India. But like we spoke yesterday, what happens is that we don't have a lot of resources at hand. And that basins particularly, there's a lot of population, and ultimately what will happen is a resource constraint and people fighting over it. So, like we mentioned, the climate fresh session yesterday, it might even lead to armed conflict, which is something that we really do not want to have in the future. So, the point of all of this is that climate migration is something that is happening right now, but it can have far more lethal consequences in the future, but it's not really looked upon properly by the government. So, I'll get into the policy setting in India. So, India, as you know, it's the largest migrant destination in this part of the world, that is South Asia. So, we have people coming from places like Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, for multiple reasons. One being conflicts, then in search of employment, of course, and now again due to climate migration. So, is there anybody who can tell me the difference between a migrant and a refugee? Anybody? Yeah, definitely. Does anybody want to add on to it?
Uh, when it comes to the word refugee, the word persecution comes attached.
Spot on. Yeah.
Persecution means that somebody is being abused or harassed by the government. Yeah. So that is the meaning of persecution.
Yeah. So, a refugee, when you define them in international law, is somebody who is fleeing from their country of origin due to persecution or an armed conflict. So, when the Refugee Convention was drafted in 1951, obviously climate change was not a big concern. So, it failed to gain place in that convention. But as you know, things have changed today. And India again would fall back a lot on this. So right now there's a lot of conversation going on in international law circles about how we should include climate refugees within the scope of refugees. It has not been there, but even then India falls back a lot because India is not a party to this convention. So India really does not have a refugee policy in hand. So when it comes to external displacement, India falls quite behind. Now, even when it comes to internal displacement or internal migration that is within the boundaries of India, we really do not have a strong policy at place. So first of all, we need to realize that to address any problem, first we need to look at, to look at any solution, we need to first address the problem. And the first thing that we need is data. First of all, India does not even have a proper database that maintains the number of people that have been displaced by all these weather events. We have external agencies, international agencies dealing with all of these collating data, but obviously it's not as forceful or legitimate as government data that can be collated during these events. Now, secondly, while most of the sudden onset events, like say a flood, what happens when one of those happens is that the government comes up with a sudden plan to displace people from one place to the other. So, for when a cyclone hits, they will say that, okay, these people have to be displaced from this place to the next. But for a longer term event, like I was mentioning about Mumbai, we know for a fact that Mumbai will be underwater in a few decades. But we don't really have a plan as of yet. We don't have a plan as to what we will be doing with the people of coastal areas like Mumbai, Chennai, and Kochi in 30 years when the places will be actually underwater. So we don't have a plan as of yet. Now, as you know, India's broader work of the climate action comes under its National Action Plan for Climate Change, which is a very broad document, but states specifically deal with action plans on climate change because states have very particular terrains because Kerala is different from Himachal Pradesh. So all of these action plans for climate change, they specifically look at how to address problems like infrastructure building and all that, but none of them, at least most of them, like 90% of them, do not really deal with climate migration. And that's kind of just ignoring the human cost of it completely. So, uh, yeah, so, and what India is doing right now is that it's looking at all climate disasters and migration from a post-disaster perspective. We are not preempting like what is going to happen. We are not even looking at how we can look at this problem effectively for a future solution. We're just looking at it from a later perspective. India updated its NDC recently, like Saddam mentioned, and around 20% of countries have mentioned climate migration somehow, but we are not one of those 20 countries. So this is the context in which we are dealing with, that we have a migration problem which is existing right now, but which is going to be exacerbated so much in the future. So in this context, when we break into the breakout room, there are two questions that I would like you to delve on. One is, what kind of protection should be given to people internally displaced by climate change? So all these internal displacements, so when they are displaced, what kind of protections then can the government give them? And secondly, what kind of preemptive policies should be made to address climate change-induced migration? So what can the government do before, like right now at this point, to address the migration that is going to be oncoming in the coming few years? Yeah, that's it.
Hello. Yes. Okay. Thanks a lot. I actually find climate migration a very interesting topic, and it's something that we need to increasingly think about. So I'll be talking about climate finance. So my first question is, what do you understand by climate finance? Anyone? Go ahead.
A lot of developing countries that we talk about now are facing the impacts, the brunt of climate change, whereas they weren't like participatory historically. So developed countries are supposed to basically mobilize funds to help them adapt and mitigate. Thank you.
Hello. So Mia Motley, the Prime Minister of Barbados in COP26, she stated, and I quote, that global problems require, global solutions, not domestic solutions. So what the developed countries are doing essentially, they are emitting a lot of carbon emissions. They are emitting a lot of carbon, but under Article 4, Para 8 of the United Nations Framework Convention on the Climate Change, there are certain vulnerable categories of countries, low-lying area countries, so on and so forth. So those categories of countries who are not emitting such carbon, but they are receiving, as ma'am pointed out, they are kind of bearing the brunt of such, problems and going, that they, so basically $100 billion was supposed to be paid by 2018, which the developed countries completely, turned a blind eye and a deaf ear to. So that is what the developing countries have been asking for.
Exactly. So they both are absolutely correct. First thing I want to tell you is that there is no fixed definition of climate finance under the UNFCCC. So that is the first problem, right? Especially for developing countries. Why? Because historically, of course, these US, Canada, European Union, all these countries have emitted massively. They've grown, they've developed. But the truth is, even today, their emissions are much more than India's, especially per capita emissions. Our emissions are large because as a country, we are quite large. So first is that we don't have a working definition. When you don't have a working definition, what do you think are the problems that are created? Any guesses? Okay, I'll tell you. When you don't have a definition, you don't have a follow-up mechanism. So according to the Paris Agreement, the developed countries were supposed to give developing countries $100 billion in climate finance. That has definitely not come in, and it was till 2020 that they were supposed to mobilize. 2020 हो चुका है, ऐसा कुछ भी हुआ नहीं अभी तक. So I am telling you that. Second is, my point is, because there is no monitoring and evaluation. When you don't have a definition, what do you monitor and evaluate, right? On what parameters do you monitor and evaluate? So that is the first problem. Second problem is the quality of climate finance, which is something very important from the perspective of India. Who all have their own NGOs here? You do? You do? Okay. So I tell you, okay, we have climate finance. I am a developed country. You are a developing country. I am above you. So I give you money for your project. You're supposed to implement it. It's climate finance. But the catch here is, it's not a grant. It is a concessional loan. So अगर आपको बाहर 6% इंटरेस्ट रेट में लोन मिल रहा है, मैं आपको 4% इंटरेस्ट रेट में लोन दूंगी, बट वो लोन ही है by the end of the day, right? That is what developed countries are doing with us. So I'll just quote a statistic. According to OECD, between 2013 and 2018, the share of loans in climate finance grew from 52% to 74%, while that of grants decreased from 27% to 20%. So to begin with, only loans were half of it, like more than half of it, and अब वो 70% पहुंच गया है. And grants, which come with relatively lesser conditions and you don't have to pay something back, are lesser. So that is the second problem that we are facing. So now there's also another problem which we as young people face. We don't have funding at all for anything that we do in life, the good, the bad, the ugly. Now the problem is, climate finance is flowing in to a certain extent in the country. On the first day I talked about mitigation and adaptation. All of this climate finance is mostly going into mitigation. It is not going into adaptation. Because why? पैसे कौन दे रहा है? Developed countries दे रहे हैं. It's like, okay, when our parents used to give us pocket money, they used to tell us what to buy. We didn't have much of a choice. Exactly in that way, developed countries tell us what to invest in, and they want us to invest in adaptation, right? Because a lot of times, for example, India में जो solar parks बनेंगे, the solar won't be for us. Half of it will be for us, the other half will go outside. So for them, mitigation projects are more important. They see it as more important because also they are not facing the worst of the climate crisis. We are. So for us, adaptation is the priority, but until and unless money starts flowing into adaptation, and as you must have noticed when you went for your projects yesterday, it does require a lot of money, especially to begin with, right? A lot of times it has economic benefits, but in the long term or maximum in the medium term, not in the short term. So that's also why we need to prioritize loss and damage, which is already occurring, and adaptation. Fourth is again very related to the NGO sector, to the civil society, is that in a couple of Western countries, very conveniently, they have started giving climate finance to more youth-based groups there, you know, because it's their own youth. What about the youth in this country? So it's not just that the developed countries are at fault, but also in India, we don't have a mechanism to let that climate finance percolate to civil society actually, or even to youth-based groups, right? Just 1 second, I think I'm just supposed to cover one more topic. Okay, yes. So on the youth part, this is something that we should definitely, I think about. If you are in that group on climate finance, if you are making recommendations to, this is a cross-sectoral issue. Because anything and everything you talk about will require finances. Which livelihoods do you want to give it to? Which sectors do you want to give it to? Is something that you definitely need to think about. One last thing is that this is something that I've been seeing in the West come up a lot. When you think of finance, what are some other terms which come to your mind? What are some institutions which come to your mind? Finance, money. Yeah. The World Bank. Yeah, great. Banks, basically, right? So in the West, there are these parameters through which they rank their banks, right? Green bank, Okage bank, fossil fuel loving bank, like that. We don't have that, right? Because all our banks are fossil fuel loving banks. But we are making that transition. So a lot of my friends, climate activist friends of the West, actually only open accounts in green banks, right? How do you define a green bank? Basically, there are many different parameters, but you look at, okay, is that bank giving loans out to a coal power plant, or is it giving it to, say, more greener projects, solar power plants, or even so these Grameen banks, these banks which are made solely for rural areas, what kind of projects are they financing? So that is something also you can think about, because a lot of times we do have good green initiatives. There was this guy in the last couple of days, he has a tech, right, which lowers the temperature of the houses that you're living in. So that kind of tech, who gives them loans, right? So these are questions that you need to ask. Just one thing I have forgotten. Okay, I will discuss it if you're in my group. Thank you very much.
Okay, what we'll do now is I've created a round, set of chairs. We'll do two more here. People interested in water can sit there. Even if it's 4 or 5 people, that's okay. But these are going to be intense discussions. I'm happy to, we are working on, there's a concept note that I have access to for COY 17 itself. You'll get a idea of the negotiations that are going to happen during COP27 regarding the same. I'll just give you examples of how we want you all to look at policy recommendations itself. Okay, at COP27, one of the biggest item on the agenda is loss and damage finance. So when you're talking about policy recommendations, it has to do with how you want loss and damage finance to happen. Basically, where will the money come from? We're looking at, we can't just say developed countries should give us money. That cannot be a policy recommendation. But if developed countries are going to get some money, will it be by taxing companies that are, emitting greenhouse gas emissions? Another part on the other side is, where will the money go? How do you identify loss and damage? Or how do you understand that these are the activities for which the loss and damage fund is going to provide finance for? So your recommendations, it is in terms of, how you envision, say, the loss and damage finance fund, how will it function? We have to be that, we can't just say, I want climate justice and, developed countries should do something for developing countries. That cannot be a policy recommendation. So look at it this way. If you want to implement, or if you are a person drafting a policy, how do you want it to look like? How do you want your governments to take action? It is in that same manner we want you all to look at. Okay, I'll share some documents even for agriculture. There's a quarter-wise agreement on agriculture itself that's going to be negotiated at COP27. So you can all just have a quick Google search about what's on the agenda or what's the agreement going to be speaking about, and then you can make recommendations accordingly. But this has to be again in the context of our country, because ultimately India is going to sign the agreement there, but that will translate to some policy within the country itself, right? So how do you want India to respond to such aspects or discussions at the international level and implement it in India? That is something we want to consider. Are you all clear about this? Yeah, each team will get a chart paper and we want you all to write it down. Okay, discuss, and then you can write how many ever recommend. There's no limit on how many recommendations you have to make, but have a discussion and ensure that it's something at a policy level. It can be a form of the demand, but then ensure that it's something that government has the power to come up with. Okay, we can't ask. For India, policy recommendation can't be that we can ask money from developed countries, right? We can't just demand it. That is not a realistic recommendation that we can have. So please keep that in mind as to what Indian government can do, because ultimately I think we're going to have an IFS officer at the closing ceremony. So we'll also be sharing the recommendations with him, and he also works closely with the Prime Minister's office as well. So they'll know about it. Yeah. Yeah, please.
Okay, so ma'am already made it clear. So just to brief you up, discussed about food and agriculture. We have discussed about mitigation and financing. So we just have a vision, like while you will be recommending us, while you will be thinking of what to give, what to suggest. So we just have a vision. If you can just think about it on these grounds, that is the Indian vision. That is how can you transform agriculture into climate resilient production system. Like this is the one of the visions. आप इसे लिख लो चाहे, लेकिन आप ध्यान में बिठा लो. Transforming agriculture into climate resilient production system, grow and ecologically sustain agricultural production to its fullest potential, like how can you make the best use of the land available, enhance livelihood opportunities in terms of water and agriculture. ये आपको आइडिया थोड़ा आइडिया देगा ना कि क्या किस बारे में आप लिख सकते हो. How can you enhance livelihood opportunities? Moreover, contribution to the economic stability at the national level. See, everything sounds meaningless because we are all materialistic at times. So economy is like what matters. So you should also try and suggest things like how this can support the economical stability of the country. So do you have some suggestions for migration and financing? Like what do you think that they should have a vision while they are suggesting some policies or something?
So for climate finance, I think like a few questions that you could explore is that which sectors should climate finance go to? Which livelihoods should it help adapt? Or which are some regions which should definitely get loss and damage finance? And you can ask them.
So
I mentioned this earlier. So one is what kind of protection should people internally displaced by climate change have? And secondly, what kind of preemptive measures can the government take to address this problem?
And one more thing, water ka thoda reh gaya hai. And when we're talking about the context of water, the Indian vision is conservation of water, minimizing wastage, and ensuring it's more equitable. Like its distribution is more equitable. So try to, go around these agendas because we can maybe have a good solution that can go for the COY and COP. So yeah, ma'am.
Yeah, I've just shared a document on the LCOY delegates chat. Those are the COY 17 themes, but then you can have a look at the adaptation and loss and damage theme. They have concept notes. The younger working groups have actually developed concept notes for each theme for people to get more context about what is going to happen there. So you can have that context in mind while you're developing recommendations as well. Even for climate finance, think about the adaptation fund that we have in India and how much money, how that money can be actually spent for, say, water and agriculture itself. Okay, we'll all break out right now. Are you all okay? Any questions? I'll take that as a no. Then we'll have 4 groups. Yeah. Yeah, sure. But what team do you guys? Okay, water and agriculture. Then you all can sit there. And then we can have climate finance as one group and climate migration as one.